Can everyone see the poster?
Yes.
All right. So hi, once again, my name is Rusudan Kvirikashvili. I'm part of a research team here in Binghamton University called the Binghamton Student Managed Adderall Research Team. And in general, we research how illicit Adderall usage, which I'll go into later what it means, how that could affect college students on college campuses. And my poster in particular is about ADHD medication, so including Adderall and alcohol usage in relation to mental distress and perceived stress on college campuses. So what exactly is Adderall? So Adderall is a type of ADHD medication, and it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it is a chronic condition which is characterized by a pattern of inattention as well as hyperactivity and impulsivity. And this could both impair in functioning and or growth in especially regions in the brain. But as a stimulant, what Adderall does to help treat ADHD is it increases certain neurotransmitters in the brain, for example, norepinephrine and dopamine, and it blocks the reuptake in the presynaptic neuron. So in other words, when blocking the presynaptic uptake, it increases those levels in the brain, which then help with motivation because dopamine is a neurotransmitter that activates certain pleasure and feelings of motivation in the brain. But what I'm here to talk about is how does illicit Adderall usage, how does that work in the brain? And so we know that people that have ADHD, they already naturally lack dopamine levels in the brain, which is why Adderall works practically pretty much well with individuals with ADHD. But if someone takes it illicitly, illicit usage means not prescribed, it could potentially be harmful. And so studies have stated that illicit Adderall usage is very prevalent on college campuses, and usage rates could range from 5.3% to 34% on college campuses. And we also know that alcohol is also a substance that is commonly used on college campuses. So in a survey, 52.5% of college students from ages 18 to 22 were seen to drink alcohol compared to people of the same age that weren't in college. So college campuses in general are a place where a lot of psychoactive substances could be used, including these two. And I forgot to mention before, but Adderall is a central nervous system stimulant, which means it increases brain activity. And so the reason why college students take it, not prescribed, even if they aren't diagnosed with ADHD, is that they want to increase their academic performance and potentially manage their stress, because Adderall is actually a Schedule II drug, which means that it could cause around the same feeling of like a high or euphoric effect similar to other drugs such as cocaine, and that could help with focus. But alcohol, on the other hand, is a central nervous system depressant, which means that it could lower brain activity and it could actually help manage stress because it inhibits areas in the brain that can pertain to memory, speech, or decision making. And so what my research team studied was that we wanted to see whether the effects of using alcohol and Adderall simultaneously on college campuses, how can that affect neurobehaviors, specifically mental distress and perceived stress, because we haven't seen many studies that focus on that. And I'll also go into what mental distress and perceived stress means. So in the methods, what we did was we gave out an anonymous survey last semester. It was created on Google Forms, and we used questions that came from other surveys or that had official scales. So for instance, we used the Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey, and this had questions that asked participants about how they viewed Adderall, how they viewed alcohol and other drugs, We also used the Kessler-6 psychological and perceived stress scales. These asked participants about mental distress. So for instance, how often they felt nervous or restless, or how often they felt worthless, which could also be symptoms of depression and anxiety. And we also asked participants about perceived stress. So this would be whether being put into certain situations, so a difficult situation, how would that affect their stress? So for instance, a question could be, how often do you feel unable to carry out normal activities during the day, or how confident do you feel in handling certain problems? And so the survey was distributed online through various social media platforms to reach different colleges in the United States, but we also distributed it here on campus using flyers and class presentations and similar activities. And so from the results, we got a total of 702 responses. 60.5% were females and 30.5.9% were males. And what we mainly found was that general ADHD medication use, so both illicit, so non-prescribed, or prescribed, was negatively correlated with hallmarks. Sorry, I meant positively correlated with hallmarks of mental distress. So that meant that when participants marked that they used ADHD medication, they were also more likely to mark that they felt a variety of mental distress symptoms such as restlessness or hopelessness. In table 2, we found that participants who marked that they used alcohol in the last 12 months, they marked that the participants that marked that they were more likely to use alcohol, or the more frequently they used it, they were also less likely, interestingly, to have symptoms of mental distress. So it seemed to have the opposite effect compared to ADHD medication. So that was how we compared and contrasted the effects, but we also looked at simultaneous usage. So for instance, in table 6, the table in the bottom, we found that participants who are more likely to use alcohol in the last 4 weeks were also more likely to have positive experiences with ADHD medication. So for instance, let's say a participant had 5 more drinks in the last 4 weeks. They were also more likely to mark that when they used illicit ADHD medication, they were more likely to achieve their desires. And some of these desires included for academic reasons, so increase in focus and just overall study habits. And it could also have included non-academic reasons. So another reason why students might use this medication is to, for example, increase athletic performance, or to lose weight, or suppress appetite, which are also side effects of Adderall usage. And finally, we also found that the more likely that participants had an increasing GPA from prescribed ADHD medication, the less likely they were actually to feel symptoms of mental distress. And in the discussion, we said that this could be because prescribed ADHD medication, since people that take prescribed ADHD medication, they have ADHD. So because they naturally already have lower levels of dopamine and they take that medication, they are less likely to be negatively affected because there's not too much dopamine in the brain being increased, whereas people who already have those regular levels of dopamine, people who don't have ADHD, now they have an unnatural amount of dopamine in the brain when taking Adderall, because now they have, let's say, like 10 times more dopamine in the brain. That could lead to them getting an increase in tolerance, kind of like we see with other drugs. When, let's say, you take more alcohol, the more and more you take it, the less likely you are to feel this euphoric effect, and therefore you start getting withdrawal symptoms because you take more, but then you get this crash effect. And so we discussed that that was probably the reason why people who took illicit ADHD medication, they were more likely to feel symptoms of mental distress compared to people who took prescribed ADHD medication. We also, when we looked at general ADHD medication use, it was supported from previous reports. So other studies also mentioned that illicit stimulant use is associated with depression symptoms. And we also stated in the results, we found that alcohol use in the last 12 months was negatively correlated with hallmarks of mental distress. But this was an interesting finding because we weren't expecting it, because previous research actually states that alcohol can actually worsen mood state. And so we could explain this by saying that maybe short-term use of alcohol could count as use during the college years. So this could initially improve mental well-being and help with stress because it inhibits certain negative emotions in the brain temporarily. But long-term use of alcohol could actually alter brain chemistry, which could lead to a worsening mood, because previous studies have shown that alcohol could potentially cause neurons in the brain to visibly shrink, or it could also kill neurons and potentially lead to permanent brain damage. That is when there is an excessive use of alcohol. And finally, there weren't many correlations found between simultaneous alcohol usage and Adderall usage, but we did see this positive experience with ADHD medication connected to alcohol usage in the few results that we found. And so this could possibly be that students could be taking certain drugs after another drug to ease the withdrawal symptoms. So this could possibly be that, let's say, a student uses Adderall and they get that euphoric effect, but then they have a crash. They could then use alcohol, for example, the next day to kind of ease the crash that they get, so to ease the withdrawal symptoms that they get. Or it could be vice versa. Students that could get a crash from alcohol, they could then take ADHD medication to help them focus the next day in class, let's say after a hangover. And that was pretty much it. So thank you for listening. And if you'd like to see the references there, they could be accessed through a QR code on the bottom. And does anyone have any questions?
Any future direction for the research that you think?
Yeah, so we were actually thinking of, in the future, one thing that we could do to improve the research is to definitely have a higher sample size. So ideally, we would be reaching for at least 1,000 responses on campuses. And an idea we had was these results are all correlational. So that means that they do correlate with each other, but it doesn't mean that it's a causation effect. So we would definitely want to see whether alcohol usage and Adderall usage, how they affect each other, because they do correlate with each other, but we don't know yet whether if, let's say, a student, like I mentioned before, if a student used Adderall, would that lead to them using alcohol because they got those withdrawal symptoms? So that's a detail that we don't know yet, but that would be something interesting to research in the future.
Okay,